And welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, joined by my co-host and four-time Celebrity Jeopardy champion. Who knew? Forbes columnist Rick Unger is here.
I beat the computer.
What is incredible. He may have a British accent, but we did check his immigration status. He is, in fact, a full-fledged American citizen. I think he's one of our bosses or something. Newsmax executive editor, Kenny.
Well, thank you.
I
see you guys have so much fun in here every night. I thought I'd join the party.
Yeah, well,
absolutely, and we honestly could not
that.
say no. So that's the best part about that. And finally, he's an editor of the WisdomDaily.com, a Newsmax contributor, and slated to play Kris Kringle in the remake of Miracle on 34th Street. That is bold casting for a rabbi.
And I'd be honored to.
Brad Hirschfield joins us once again. Yes, it's time for the Daily Download. It's our hybrid download. So as you know by now, Germanwings flight 9525 crashed in the southern French Alps yesterday, killing all 150 passengers on board, including 3 Americans. Now, French officials saying audio recovered from the black box voice recorder reveals the captain of the aircraft was locked out of the cockpit and by the co-pilot, who then plunged the plane into the ground on purpose. So what do we know about the co-pilot? Andreas Lubitz. He was a 28-year-old German national from the town of Montebar. He joined Germanwings in September of 2013 and trained with the Lufthansa flight school with 630 flight hours. A French prosecutor said Lubitz, quote, wanted to destroy, unquote, the aircraft. So what drove this pilot to crash the aircraft, killing all on board? Well, there has been talk of depression. What was the cause? And joining us now is psychologist, Dr. Bart Rossi, who has worked with airline pilots in the past to deal with stress. Welcome, Dr. Rossi.
Nice to be with you.
So there are reports that family members have said that Andrea Lubitz suffered from depression in the past. We're assuming that the crash investigators are looking into that kind of background. Is there anything special they should be looking for that would give any indication as to why he crashed an aircraft purposely with 150 people on board?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind to me is that this is a long-standing problem that he's. This is not something that just was a spur of the moment, something that caught his fancy. He thought that some way he needed to destroy himself and everyone else. It didn't go down that road. This is a long-standing personality disorder, probably masked quite well. Some people seem to think that he was affable and a pleasant personality. But there's a lot underneath the surface here, and I'm sure they'll find, looking at his telephone records, his emails, that there's a lot here that's under the surface.
When somebody commits suicide, you know what? If they're that depressed and they have to take their own lives, while it's unfortunate, then so be it. It happens often. What compels somebody to crash a plane with all those people on board with them? I mean, why, if he was so affable and he didn't seem to have any kind of anger issues, I mean, we're all speculating here, but there haven't been a lot of people that have come forward and said, this guy was obviously had a problem, severe problem psychologically. What compels somebody to get to that point in their lives where not only they take their own life, but they also crash a plane with all those people on board as well?
Well, your point is an excellent one. This is really mass murder. It's beyond suicide. It's an actual mass murder. So what I'm looking at here, and from my perspective, is that we have a serious conflict inside this person, within his personality, that's been festering for a long time. We don't know exactly what type of conflict, what kind of retained anger, as psychologists call it, what's there, what's motivated him to actually take this type of drastic, crazy action. What compelled him to do this? I am sure that we're going to find out much more about this person, his personality features, his traits, and his characteristics in the coming days, and we're going to find out that he in fact was very troubled. I do not think he was part of a terrorist plot.
Dr. Rossi, it's Rick Unger. Listening to what you're saying, well, I do think we have to be careful not to overdo this, because air travel is still the safest way to get around, even in the face of a horrible tragedy like this. It sounds like you're saying that there's no way to even find out about this sort of thing through any kind of psychological testing before a pilot like this is hired, or through, say, an annual examination. Is it impossible to see this sort of thing coming, and it's just one of those things?
Well, this is an important question. I believe that, yes, you can pick out a great deal of information with a good psychological, and I think it should be mandatory, and it probably is for many airlines, a psychological, including psychological tests today, that in the public safety area you cannot fudge, you cannot make yourself look better than you are, you can't fake it with an interview, with a write-up. And I also believe that going forward, when there's a medical exam every year or every 6 months for a pilot, there should be a corresponding psychological evaluation.
I agree.
And in some of these cases, you may find that someone has conflict and has difficulty that needs to be addressed. I am not saying that every other pilot should be weeded out and not fly. I'm not saying that at all. But we can find out which individuals have problems today, and we all have issues. We all have sides to our personality that need work. Which pilots can we identify as having specific problems, whether it's marital, whether it's drinking, whether it's a drug-related issue?
Certainly going to learn more, Doctor, no question. I'm sorry we have to wrap up there. We got to go, but we certainly appreciate your input here, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon.
Very good. Thanks. I enjoyed it.
So guys, let's go around the table quickly. Here's the whole thing. We keep hearing, this is what happens during any tragedy. We obviously assess everything. We get the who, what, when, where, why, how, and then we try to assess blame in some capacity. In this case, it's, well, maybe you should have been tested, from a psychological perspective. But can't you just dupe whoever's administering that test? In other words, maybe this couldn't have been prevented.
It might not have been, and that's really important. The impulse to try and figure out the why in the face of tragedy is usually ahead of our understanding of the real whys. Right. So it's really important to slow down. The one thing we do know is in 1995, the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, began mandatory suicide prevention training and awareness, and they cut the suicide rate by 50%. So I don't think it's necessarily about what you can preclude, but you can educate ahead of the problem and make a material difference.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, it was 1 year ago this month, Malaysian Airlines 370 crashed, vanished, disappeared. The pilot is still the prime suspect on that, that was a suicidal thing. So nothing has changed in the last 12 months. As someone who flies a lot, what the doctor said is not very reassuring. I mean, how are you going to test the pilots? For that matter, what about bus drivers? What about people driving automobiles?
Right, this could happen under any vehicle. That's true, Ken. Rick,
I'd
love to get your thoughts on this.
That's all I can say about it.
Right. Coming up next, ISIS invades America, and a little later, Hillary supporters have a list of words they don't want you to say. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm Joe Concha with Rick Unger, and we're also joined, special guest, Ken Chandler, as well as Brad Hirschfield. Today, a U.S. military reservist and his cousin were arrested for planning to join ISIS. 22-year-old Hassan Edmonds was arrested at Chicago's Midway Airport, while his older cousin, Jonas Edmonds, was arrested at his home in Aurora, Illinois, for conspiring to attack U.S. military bases. Sound familiar? The arrest comes after telling their plan to an undercover FBI agent. They're charged with conspiring, thank you, he said, to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization and face up to 15 years if convicted. Through a statement, U.S. Attorney Fardin said, quote, "We will pursue and prosecute with vigor those who support ISIL and its agenda of ruthless violence. Anyone who threatens to harm our citizens and allies, whether abroad or here at home, will face the full force of justice," unquote. Let's bring in our terror expert and frequent guest, former FBI agent and Navy SEAL, Jonathan Gilliam is here. He's also the CEO of Continued Services. Jonathan, good news, the FBI was all over this and all over these guys before they had a chance to do any harm. What do you know about this operation?
Well, personally, I mean, these type of operations are kept pretty close to the cuff. I mean, they don't really tell a whole lot of people about these because they involve undercover operations. But I am familiar with the way that this type of an operation unfolds. And I will tell you, this is a good example of staying a step ahead of, the issues that are happening within the Islamic community by either having undercover work or having sources tell them. It's not clear exactly how they found out about this. I mean, we may never actually know that. I would expect the Bureau to keep that hush-hush. But you see now why, when they take away things like the surveillance program here in New York from the NYPD, which is associated with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, you see how important these types of operations really are.
I think this is the third time a member of the U.S. military wanted to commit jihad against America. I mean, even last week there was a U.S. Air Force veteran who was attempting to travel to Syria to provide material support to ISIS. And of course, there was the Fort Hood shooting, right? That was considered workplace violence and not a terrorist attack, even though Nadal Hassan was screaming Allah Akbar when he started his rampage. Are these practices in place to properly vet potential members of the military? Are there practices, I should say?
Well, you know, that's a good question. And there are psychological evaluations, and of course they can't, you know, you can't go in there and eliminate people from serving for the United States military just because they're Muslim. I mean, that's never going to happen because, you know, the sheer freedoms that we enjoy here and the opportunity to have Muslims, you know, actually serve in our military. However, there needs to be, you know, in the military when I was in, again, and we keep seeing having these problems with force protection issues, there needs to be more monitoring of, you know, social media, internet access that these people have. What is this guy? What kind of access does he have? Is it just a military and reserve National Guard type base access, or does he have access to special programs? And I think that there needs to be more overwatch once somebody's in, because again, this person has to belong to a mosque somewhere. Somebody that has this much of a spirit of jihad doesn't just study at home. They always, 100% of the time, belong to a mosque. And I think this is really, even more so than the military doing overwatch, there needs to be overwatch from within these mosques to tell us when there's somebody like this.
Jonathan, thanks for coming on. All great points, particularly with New York and the surveillance program going away. Obviously, that had to have played a role here because they were so far out ahead of this plot. So once again, good to see you.
Thank you, Pat.
Now, once again, we see individuals wanting to carry out jihad against America, but don't bring religion into this because, as the president says, this is not a religious war. Roughly a month ago, the Department of Homeland Security warned that right-wing extremists are an equal, or in some cases, greater threat to America than ISIS. Is the White House blind to this threat, Brad?
Yeah, it's a kind of dangerous, willful blindness, however well motivated, because it confuses cultural sensitivity with false equivalence. So it's true that there has been a study that indicates numerically there are more right-wing threats than there are Islamic threats. But it's a fake comparison because the majority of the right-wing, this is by their own internal DHS study, indicates that most right-wing threats are one-on-one, conducted against law enforcement when they're serving warrants or otherwise enforcing the law. Doesn't mean I'm going easy on them and trying to kill cops. But that is fundamentally different than an organized, communally driven assault on large-scale populations of civilians. So you can count and say there's more of one than the other, but in terms of potential devastation, tragically, it's not even close.
Rick?
I actually don't think the White House is blind to all of this. I think they understand it. Look, you know, what impresses me is that we keep catching these people, and good for the FBI and good for whoever else is involved with it, but I'm impressed. We don't hear many stories of them getting through.
But it only takes one to get through.
Not really, because it's just one person who's going to be a soldier over there.
Yeah.
If one gets through here. What I found scary about what we learned today was one of them was staying behind.
But this is the ultimate nightmare for the security services, finding these people. They usually don't have any previous record. You know, yes, you can monitor the mosques, but you know, until you have to get lucky, basically, to catch these people. I mean, it's really
I don't
scary.
know how they keep doing it.
You made a very good point. We were talking about this during a commercial yesterday, that we're just so shocked that Mall of America hasn't been hit yet, right? Because it doesn't.
And here,
it's not like there's security.
Minnesota, by the way.
And I come into Penn Station, and I think every time, like, boy, it would have been so easy for me. There's no security at the train station.
Well, that's not true. There is a lot of security. I use the train stations, and there's a lot of security you don't see in terms of cameras, in terms of devices that can detect explosives. I mean, you know, they've got hundreds of cameras. At Grand Central Terminus, which is a big station here in New York, I mean, it is crawling with surveillance equipment. Not to mention visible state troopers, National Guardsmen, local police.
Right.
Everywhere.
And that physical presence is a very serious deterrent. People
is a
do
deterrent.
experience that.
Yes.
So it's a combination.
Yeah.
There is good security measure in place, and there's probably less threat than at our most fearful moments we imagine. So the trick is, how do you remain vigilant, and I mean truly vigilant, without getting panicked.
Good point. And another good point by you, by the way, which is that the FBI, we're so cynical and we love to criticize the administration or Congress or the Secret Service or the FBI, after 9/11. How did you not connect the dots? Bravo, FBI.
Absolutely.
Good job.
You were
Exactly.
way ahead of this
Really
and
did.
arrested these guys. So let's applaud for once instead of placing blame.
And
You
by
know
the
what-
way, you don't have to stage a big extravaganza
Right, no.
anymore. I mean, you saw what happened in that cafe in Sydney, Australia. Brought the whole city to a standstill.
That's right. It
You
doesn't
know,
take much.
It doesn't take much.
John also raised the issue about
seconds.
working with the mosques. We'll never know. Maybe the mosque did help us with this.
That's a good
Exactly.
point.
You know?
Inside intel. And we'll have to end it there. Coming up next, if you're a reporter, Clinton supporters have some requests for you might want to hear about before you write about the First Lady. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the show. I'm Joe Concha along with my co-host Rick Unger and, of course, Newsmax executive editor Ken Chandler and Brad Hirschfield. Well, this is a great story. New York Times' Amy Josich tweeting yesterday that the pro-Hillary group HRC super volunteers warned, quote, "We will be watching, reading, listening, and protesting co-ed sexism what's that?
Coded sexism.
Coded sexism. Co-ed, yeah, that wouldn't really work well.
Yes.
In an
Redefinition of
email
the term.
to Ms. Josich, yes. So, coded sexism, you ask? I'm so astounded by this story, I can barely get the words out. Yes, they have asked, or maybe demanded, that Amy not use the following words when writing about the First Lady. Got a pen? Okay, here we go. Secretive, polarizing, calculating, disingenuous, insincere, ambitious, inevitable, entitled, overconfident, and the phrases, will do anything to win, represents the past, out of touch. Where is the co-ed or coded sexism? Of course, we have no proof whatsoever, and let's be clear on this, and actually doubt that Mrs. Clinton had anything to do with this. But her supporters haven't exactly helped her either by, emailing the New York Times. But since they requested it, we will have fun with this. So it's time for our lightning round. I'm going to say these words to our panel, and we're going to ask you what the first word or words comes to mind in your case. So, Brad, let's start off with the word on top. I say secretive. You think what?
Email.
Ken.
I'd have to go with email as well.
Very good. Mr. Unger.
I'm just going to say the same word about these people, morons.
Very good. Actually, let's do it this way. Word, word, word. We don't have to do the
Yeah,
same
right.
3 words because we would get the same answer. Okay, Rick, we'll start with you. Polarizing.
Polarizing, goodness. George W. Bush.
Ken.
Polarizing. I think the problem I have with all these is that I think they're applicable to every politician.
Exactly.
That's the problem. So,
Except inevitable. I can't figure out how inevitable can be interpreted as a sexist word.
I mean, and in this day and age, isn't every politician polarizing?
Yeah.
That's true. Let's
Yeah.
go through this.
You
Is
know?
there a politician out there that isn't secretive, polarizing, calculating, disingenuous, insincere, ambitious, inevitable? Well, inevitable. I guess we
yeah,
could
that's
play
the
with
one.
that.
Inevitable, my word there was Clintonian.
Clintonian.
There is something. So I don't know that
Inevitable
they're
about
all
it.
like this, but I think the interesting thing is I think this didn't come from Hillary and is a problem because the request itself is sexist.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Right? It's a sexist request because at its core, what it's telling people is you dare not write about her in a way that we don't think will play well given popular associations to women in office.
I'll tell you
in
what.
other words, by virtue of being a woman, a different code should apply. The last time I
Right.
checked, that is sexist.
I'll tell you what, I think we can all agree that I'm pretty Hillary friendly, right? I promise these people that I will now use every single word on that list, every adjective that they listed in a column,
Well, I think
and apply it to Hillary Clinton.
there's one word that's missing, and that's scripted, and that's really the most dangerous word for her, I think.
Well, and for us too, apparently.
Well, for us too. But I mean, if she is seen as scripted,
Right.
It's going to be a problem
that's
for
not
her
sexist.
campaign.
But that's not a sexist
It's not
thing.
sexist, but I don't think
But it's a
that any
challenge
of
for her
these
as
are
a candidate.
particularly sexist. I mean, I think that this whole thing that they're suggesting it's sexist is ridiculous.
So I see the 2016 race, if Hillary runs and she is the Democratic nominee, it's going to play out like this. The race card goes away with President Obama. You remember, MSNBC had a whole list of words you can't say with President Obama. Golf, angry, Chicago, experienced, and food stamps.
Who said you couldn't say that?
There, on
was
various
policy.
shows on there,
Yeah.
there were whole segments that those words were dog whistles
And
for.
yet I've used every one, seriously, in
Yes.
columns I have written about Barack Obama, I have used every one of those words.
I'm sure you have.
I have.
Well, you're using a dog whistle.
and nobody arrested me.
Not the word police, no. But they
But they
did
would
talk
like
about
to.
it.
Yeah.
Apparently.
And
Those
that's
people
the
never
difference.
heard of the First Amendment.
No,
I
but
mean,
this is
They're warning journalists what words they can use?
So the race card goes away, and now the gender card
Yeah.
comes into
Right.
play.
I want to know who they are.
And that's what's at center stage here. That anytime Mrs. Clinton is going to be criticized, it'll say, "Well, you're picking on the girl."
Exactly.
And that's what happens when you don't have a lot of accomplishments to run on. Now, I get the resume's great,
Right.
but in every resume, there's little subsets of what you accomplished in every job, and that's where I think they're always going to fall back on this. You're just attacking the woman, Brad.
I think they will. Look, it's true and shouldn't be denied in this way to defang the whole thing. Certain traits that we value in men, we actually attack in women. There, it's true, we said it, it's a challenge. But to allow that to be an excuse to tell journalists
if
what they're
you're
not
run-
allowed to say is insane. And I want to be clear, I don't believe it's reflective of how Hillary has approached feminism. I think she has a real problem, though, if this is what her base believes.
Yeah.
If you're running for president, you've got to get over that.
You better.
You better
and
get
fast.
over
Yeah,
that.
remember, it wasn't
Yeah.
her or anybody
I
representing.
said, I don't even think it reflects her, but it is a problem. And like we would always say, she better come out personally
And condemn
teach
this.
her own why this is not the feminism
I
she
agree.
has spent her life advocating
And she should
for.
come
right.
out specifically on this. And
On this issue,
and
with
condemn
these people.
them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think Ken, because he's my boss, had the best point in this entire segment.
You're kissing,
and that is the whole scripted part. She's going to have the same problem that Mitt Romney had.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is she being genuine? Am I getting the real person, the person that she wants me to see?
That's right.
Anyway, coming up next, it's potluck time. And a little later, our favorite segment we call Yay or Nay. This is the Daily Max, only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. It's potluck time. This is the part of the show where we go around the table, share our favorite stories of the day. Brad Hirschfield, you're our head chef.
All right. I want to talk about Lee Kuan Yew's buns.
Beg your pardon? Can you repeat
That's
that again?
yes, Lee Kuan Yew's buns. I said it. He's dead, the former Singaporean leader. I want to talk about his buns. Before anyone gets a little carried away here, there were actually buns baked by a big chain in Singapore called Bread Talk. They did it in tribute to their leader. In fact, they came out with a sign that said, "Thank you for your unwavering strength and dedication to transforming Singapore. Let us join hands and hearts to honor him, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew." Right? This was all done as a tribute. Sounds beautiful, right?
Yeah.
24 hours in, they all had to pull the buns. They pulled the buns because people went crazy saying it's disrespectful, it's disgusting, how it's in poor taste. People, and by the way, the profits from the sale of the buns was all going to charity in memory of their leader. So this is a really interesting moment because it turns out that what counts as patriotic, what counts as honoring a leader can be really misunderstood in different camps. And think about all the fights that happen in our own culture between people who have similar motivations, but they can't appreciate where each other are coming from. And we go immediately to pull that. That's disgusting. That's inappropriate. As opposed to saying, wow, what are you thinking? Because if it turns out you mean well, maybe your bun should stick around.
Those buns look tremendous.
know
By the way,
what
can we
to
put
say
those back up
about
on the
this one,
screen?
you know?
Those things really, really look scrumptious. Look at
How
them.
bad does that look? And you can see on the graphic, there's the thank you addressed him. There was no confusing it. It just turns out that in moments of stress, people get really funny about what counts as a legitimate way to honor a loved or cherished person.
That happened to me not too long ago. That I was given the business card of a Japanese businessman, and I took it and I just looked at it for a second and I put it in my pocket. And I was told later that he was very offended because you're supposed to hold it with two hands and study
Look
it,
at
Study it,
Right.
acknowledge
and then
with
put it in
slight
a
bow.
very safe
right.
place. And if you don't do that, then you're the biggest jerk in the world. I am a jerk,
You
but not
gotta
in
know
that
these cultures.
Yeah, you're not a jerk.
You gotta
But
know
again,
these
it speaks
things.
to, yes, knowing the details of other cultures is important, but when you don't get it quite right, freaking out makes you look silly. You end up lecturing people for doing something good. The money would have gone to charity. So in their defense of their great leader, they ended up costing probably hundreds of thousands of dollars that would have gone to feed hungry kids. That's not good.
Yeah, and as Chris Kringle, you take that personally.
Oh, you're going to keep
I
pushing that
think-
one, aren't you?
I think it's more interesting that Lee Kuan Yew has become a model for autocrats around the world who idolize him. People like Putin, and there's a long conversation in that.
Yes, it's
that we
not
should
right.
have.
A great Democrat he wasn't, though I would say this. if Putin can pull off the level of economic
Well, that's
empowerment
what he says,
that,
right.
that you did,
Right.
he'll go down as a hero with all of his, semi-naked tiger wrestling. It won't matter, because that's
he
the one
won't.
thing that Lee Kuan Yew did do, right? A great Democrat, not at all. But if you look at the baseline of human life in Singapore, pre and post, no comparison.
And we'll end it on that happy note in memory of not an exemplary leader, but one that made some folks' lives better during his tenure. Kenny, you're up.
Well, following on from Brad's buns, I'm not quite sure how I do that, but
That's worse than Hughes.
for all of you who think the country's going to pot, well, it turns out Willie Nelson, that's what Willie Nelson would like to happen, and that's what he'll do if he has his way. The 81-year-old singer told the Daily Beast website that he's planning to market his own brand of weed, and it's going to be called Willie's Reserve. And in addition to this, they're going to open up shops called Willie's Reserve shops, and they'll be branded bongs. And all this is going to happen in the states where pot is legal, like Washington, I think Alaska,
Colorado.
and Colorado. So the Daily Beast asked, what exactly is Willie's Reserve? Well, we all know that Willie Nelson is pro-legislating.
What he's carrying around in the back of the bus.
But a spokesman for Willie said that Willie wants Willie's Reserve, and I'm quoting here, to be something that's reflective of his passion. It was developed by his family, and their focus is on the environment and social issues. Now, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with the environment or social issues, but I just lay it on the table, and I guess that's why we call this segment potluck.
This
It's
is
put
great.
together.
Great word.
Fair
Nice.
trade, organic dope.
There you
That's,
go.
I mean, we're
That's
gonna,
right.
This is
gonna get
very, very simple. Willie Nelson can do no wrong. Period.
Well, he's
Says-
right in the sense where this will make money.
Oh, I'm sure.
This will make a lot. He had a perfect alliterative moment, though. It could have just been Willie's weed, and everybody would have accepted it. This sounds like when you drink like Maker's Mark 46. It's Maker's 46. It's a reserve. Oh, this must be Willie's good pot. Like not the kind from a shed, but from the greenhouse
very best.
behind the shed.
Right.
In a serious part of the story, they did make the point that he is using his name and his brand to get out ahead of all the big companies that are definitely going to do the same thing.
yeah.
And
There's
then
no
everybody's
question.
going to do
It's
it.
brilliant.
huge business
And
that's
it's
going to
gonna-
emerge.
He can pay the IRS some of the money he owes
It's going
them.
to
a
spread to
wonderful thing.
other states. It's going to be huge
But
business.
remember, always tell your mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys.
Boy, we are a long way from
But
Paul.
dope growers, yes.
We're a long way from Paul Newman's own, huh?
Oh,
What did he make? What was that?
Spaghetti
Everything.
sauce?
Spaghetti
Popcorn?
sauce,
Salad dressing,
Oreos,
right?
salad
It's a
dressing.
different world. Anyway,
Yeah.
quick break, more potluck when we come back. The Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm your host, Joe Concha. If you're just joining us, we're in the middle of our potluck, where we're sharing our favorite stories of the day. And I'm sorry, Rick. No, I'm up. I'm up. Thank you.
Who's up? Who's
I
up?
was thinking of acquiescing, but what the
on
hell?
second?
I'll take it. That's fine. Anyway, the NFL's reign of terror is over. What am I talking about? Talking about a blackout rule that has existed in the NFL since 1973. What is the blackout rule? Basically, NFL teams, home teams, had to sell out their games entirely, or else the city and region, for that matter, where that team is playing, all the fans can't see the game. It gets blacked out and they're showing some other game that they don't care about. And this has gone on now for nearly about 40 years, 42 years. And it's just amazing, given how much ticket sales are and how much people are struggling. We talked yesterday how Americans are going paycheck to paycheck. They barely have any money saved. You want to go to an NFL game, a Giant game for that matter, for instance, you're bringing, let's say, your family of 4. It's a $700 day.
yeah, easily.
By the time you
Easily.
get, and that's if you're in the upper deck.
Right.
To park, it costs $35. And the NFL also insists now on more later games. You didn't have a Sunday night game before. That exists. Monday night games, are they purposely having in cold weather cities so there's snow? And finally, they fessed up and said, okay, we will allow teams that don't sell out their cities, or even if you lived in the region, 100 miles away from the stadium, but you were like a New England Patriots fan, but you lived in New Hampshire, you couldn't watch the game. And finally, they came to their senses and said, you know what? ticket sales aren't as important as the revenue we're getting from television, so let's forgive the rule. Brad, you're a Bears fan.
Yeah, I grew up in the bad years of the Bears and didn't get to see those games because who wanted to go to Soldier Field?
Avellini
20
years?
below. Yeah, it was terrible. It was tragic. So you'd sit at home, and we had seasons tickets for some of those years, so we weren't part of the problem, but who wanted to go? You couldn't see the games. Look, I think what you said is the key. Ticket sales are not what they once used to be. And the other piece of it is, I think they understood that punishing people for not going to see underperforming teams was not going to exactly build support. So what you're going to have to do is build support for the team and let that drive sales as opposed to the other way around.
I always wondered, Ken, if the blackout actually compelled enough. I mean, it kind of worked, but imagine like, oh my God, my friend won't be able to watch the game at home. I better go spend $700 on some tickets.
Well, I lived in Boston in the 1980s when the Patriots were really a bad team. They didn't sell out. They were blacked out a lot of the time. However, the local TV station that was an NBC affiliate used to actually buy tickets to fill it out so they could get the rights. Which, and thinking of that, you know, I'm reminded now of all these Sunday afternoon pay-per-view things that DirecTV has and you know other carriers. So I mean, you can get around the blackout if you're willing to pay a subscription fee to get the out of town. The Sunday ticket.
It's only $500.
That's a fortune too.
But at least you're getting
when
all
you
the
say
games.
It's only $500. How much did you say it was to go to the stadium?
Yeah, it's a little bit more, and that's only one game. But very good point.
It's a
I didn't know that about
thing.
Boston, the NBC affiliate. Anyway,
It's a wonderful thing.
Okay, good. That was
about
nice
time.
and pithy, and that gives you room for your potluck, which is probably the best of the night.
So, for those who don't know, and I promise you that when I'm done filling in, you'll wish you still didn't know. This today is National Vote-A-Rama Day in the United States Senate. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is Vote-A-Rama Day in the U.S. Senate? This is a real thing. Every year, the budget comes along to the Senate, and they use this as an opportunity to bring up every possible amendment that has no chance to ever pass, but is designed to embarrass the people in the opposition party. So, for instance, today, and this will go on roughly till 2 o'clock in the morning, tomorrow morning, because there'll be roughly 100 amendments that they have to vote on. Republicans will be required to go on the record against giving minimum wage increases. They're also going to have to go on the record voting against a proposal to give pregnant women protection against discrimination. Why? Because there was something else put in the amendment they can't vote for. Democrats are going to have to cast votes that will make it look like they do not support Israel. All sorts of these things, and it all happens on Budget Vote-A-Rama Day. What's the purpose? The only purpose is to create a record that when you start seeing political ads next year, you'll see people being attacked for having cast these votes. This is what your taxpayer money is going for. To pay senators to operate the United States Senate for this one whole day, and by the way, they're not there very often, where they do nothing but create a scenario to do negative ads for their opponents.
I would just like to say I think it's a wonderful day because at least they're not doing any damage.
They're not doing damage.
Okay. A do no harm
Except
approach.
each other.
To the extent that it's true, and you're right, Rick, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's a problem. But I blame we the people as much as them the politicians.
Absolutely. It's always
when
us.
we're ready to say to these guys, we're done with those kind of gotcha ads that come from your gotcha politics. And even if we agree with how you voted on Vote-A-Rama, that's not good enough. Because while you were voting correctly on Vote-A-Rama, you were wasting our time and our money.
And by the way, during these ads, the black and white doesn't make anybody any more evil, does it?
Nah,
I mean,
it's
really?
all
Can we
stupid.
stop at that?
No,
It's always
it's
slow motion. It's funny. Anyway, that's all the time we have for our potluck. But when we come back, it's time for Yay or Nay. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax TV. And I can honestly say that has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about right now.
But it was so cool.
It was so cool. They played it during the commercial. I said we have to show our audience that. So that is a dancing dog randomly for no apparent reason. Welcome back to the Daily Wrap.
Works for me.
It's time for Yay or Nay. First up, newly announced GOP presidential candidate, you may have heard of him, Ted Cruz, discussed his musical taste on Tuesday on CBS This Morning, saying that he, quote, grew up listening to classic rock, but his taste changed after 9/11. Quote, on 9/11, I didn't like how rock music responded and country music collectively. The way they responded, it resonated with me. I had an emotional reaction that said, these are my people. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Cruz's comments made the news rounds, obviously, but one guest on MSNBC's Now with Alex Wagner had a different perspective on the matter, to say the least. In response to Cruz's comments, a panelist said, quote, nothing says let's go kill some Muslims like country music. Fill-in host Ari Melber, who was a very capable individual, later apologized. So, will this guest ever be a panelist on the Daily Wrap, everybody? Brad?
I believe in forgiveness, so maybe, but that's a disgusting thing to have said. It really is gross.
Yeah,
Really
Kenny.
gross.
No. Unequivocally, no.
That's right, you make these
Then I
decisions.
change my vote. If he says
There's
nay,
absolutely no
I'm with a
point.
nay.
No point
That's
that
it.
I answer this because
Done.
he's already said
Done.
no. So
It's done. It's a nay.
That's my opinion.
I actually was watching when it happened, and I got to be honest and say it was funny when she said it. On reflection, you went, "That was really a terrible thing to say,"
terrible.
but everybody laughed.
That's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Joe Walsh was on that set, and a couple
she
of other
laughed,
people,
yeah.
right?
My
Melber didn't laugh.
partner Michael Steele was on the segment,
Oh,
and
boy.
he laughed.
He laughed. But
you couldn't help but laugh. And then when you thought about it, you thought, no, that wasn't okay.
But that's the nature of stereotypes. Just enough truth
And I'm a
to
country
let you
music
laugh
fan.
at what you think is
Right.
inappropriate.
I'm a country
and
music
that's
fan, too.
why it's actually so divisive and so wrong.
it was
It's
wrong.
just enough truth to make you think what's funny is actually something really divisive and ugly.
Okay. Well, we should say again, host Ari Melber did not laugh, and he did apologize later. So good for Ari. I'm a yay for coming on the show, so I could throw her off after the first segment. Yes. So this next story may come as a shock to many of you, but apparently watching or accessing porn, on government-issued devices is legal. Well, at least it was until yesterday when a House Oversight Committee passed a bill prohibiting federal employees from doing so. North Carolina Representative Mark Meadows proposed the Eliminating Pornography from Agencies Act. Where has that been? This after an EPA employee was found spending up to 6 hours a day looking at porn and saving said porn on a government server that his colleagues had access to. Remember, this guy is a government agent, so this was all done with your tax dollars. I've got to ask an obvious question here. Do I even have to ask it?
no.
Shouldn't this have been a law already? Brad?
It took a law to do this. If there's any problem here, it took a bill now to deal with the problem.
This is an example of government too much regulation.
Oh my God! It's out of control.
It should be mentioned, Kenny, that on your server, Mr. Unger was watching Spankenstein
Don't
earlier.
tell, don't tell
I don't even know
that.
what that is. I confess.
Anyway, you're a yay.
Maybe
and
we can get the dancing
See,
dogs here,
Yeah, you guys are always complaining about government regulation. They pass a regulation and you got a problem.
I'm with you. I can't believe that it wasn't already banned.
I think it's basically. I mean, no, I wasn't, because probably maybe the government for once said, you know what, the people have common sense enough not to do this while at work, and particularly on a government agency.
Oops.
They actually have to have their hand held. No, this is actually a law now. Good Lord. College football recruiters can be pretty creative when going after an all-star player, but this school definitely had a different approach. Jay Harbaugh, Michigan Wolverines assistant coach and son of head coach Jim Harbaugh, formerly of the 49ers, sent a handwritten note not to a coveted player, but to the coveted player's girlfriend. Her name is Savannah. We got the letter. It says, quote, Savannah, I hope this note finds you well. You're doing great. My name is Jay Harbaugh. I'm the tight ends coach at Michigan with the new staff. I really have enjoyed getting to know your pop lately, and he speaks very highly of you, so I'm sure you're very special. Keep him in line. Also, we need to get him out here to visit us again and meet the new staff. Put in a good word. Hope to meet you when I'm out in PHI, I guess it's Philadelphia, this spring. Go Blue. So, Pop, I guess, is her nickname for her boyfriend.
Something to say about
Do you ever thought you would ever see something like this before? Yay or nay, going after the girlfriend of the coveted blue
Look,
chipper?
given the stuff that's done to recruit these guys, and it isn't primarily their kids, but that's the nature of the business, this is pretty mild, so let it be. Who
True.
cares?
Kenny, quickly.
Yeah, I agree. Let it be. It's
This
not an
is
issue.
exactly the kind of stuff you get from an underhand school like the University of Michigan. This would
God.
never happen at the Ohio State University.
It's an OSU guy talking, and that's what that's about.
We ended with the Woody Hayes story, which is they were 59-0 nothing, and they go for 2, and they ask a reporter afterwards, why'd you go for 2? Because I couldn't go for 3.
Right.
And that's how much Ohio State hates Michigan. Panel, thank you. Kenny, thank you for joining us tonight. And that's our show for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. for the Daily Wrap. I'm Joe Concha saying bye-bye.